guys, welcome to the channel. As always, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review. And I'm going to be talking about Picard Season 3, Episode 3, 17 seconds. But I'm going to do all the good non-spoilery stuff first. So if you haven't seen it, don't worry about that. First of all, before we get into the video, I just want to say thanks for taking the time to choose to watch this. If you've got a second, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. So yeah, after last week's cliffhanger, we had a lot of questions, and we do get a lot of answers, and more answers than I expected in this week's episode. Left with Picard, his son, and the Titan on the run at the end of last week. So a nebula, a ship, a hidden sun, it was all going very Wrath of Khan, right? But this week's a little bit more Hunt for Red October and Undiscovered Country than Wrath of Khan, if you asked me. And if you haven't watched my last video yet, maybe it might be worth checking out if you haven't seen this week's Star Trek Picard, that's all I'm going to say. So we got a lot of father-son stuff in this episode between Jack and Jean-Luc. But we don't get a lot of time of them together, it's all sort of building to that. But the way that this episode is paced and how last week's revelation is dealt with wasn't really what I was expecting. I mean how Beverly, Picard and Jack interact, because they're never really together as much as you'd expect in this episode. And Beverly does give us a long list of reasons as to why she did what she did and she hid Jack for all those years, but that's for later on in the video. We also sort of get some sort of Riker backstory too, but not really. It's a little bit about when he had his first son with Troy, and yeah, there's some dodgy de-aging. And speaking of Troy, she finally pops up with now a very weird accent, at least that's what I thought. And what about Vadic? Well, the truth is she's not really in it much this week, which again I was surprised about after last week's introduction to her. We do learn more about the villains though, and yeah, that's going to blow some people's mind if you haven't seen the episode, but if you have, I want to know what you think. Did you see that coming? Did you not? Where do you think it's all going to go? And of course, we also have some Rafi stuff in this episode, so she sort of does the same thing that she's done in the last two episodes, but now she's got Worf with her, who, let's say, has a slightly new outlook on things, and after his reintroduction last week, I know a lot of people have been looking forward to seeing him back on screen. And we do get some blanks filled in about what he's been up to, and he does help to push the plot forward in this story as well, because he sort of has experience with what's going on, more so, as far as I'm aware, than any other member of the TNG crew, at least for the moment. And when you find this all out, it does become a bit clearer how they're going to link the Rafi and the Titan story after this week, that's all. But yeah, they're not doing much with Rafi again this week, even after pairing her up with Worf. And it is kind of hard to talk about this episode without getting into spoilers, so let's get to it. So yeah, great opener, great CGI, all the stuff that we've seen in the trailers. Now that the Titan's on the run though, I was expecting Vadic to be a little bit more manic like Chang in the Undiscovered Country, but she did seem a little bit calm, and we do hear her henchmen or her crew talk for the first time, and it is more like clucks or ticks. So yeah, the Titan's on the run, and a lot of the crew are blaming Jack for what's going on, and I can't say they're wrong, but I don't know if I particularly like that in this episode. So again, going back to the whole Wrath of Khan thing, they're in a nebula and they can't jump out using warp, so they've got to go deeper into it, affecting more systems on the ship. And we've got Shaw, Riker and Picard all on the bridge, and it turns out that too many captains don't spoil the bridge. Because Shaw, again, for the third week in a row, is absolutely on point. Everything that he says and does is 100% correct. He's not making a lot of bad decisions. He's going by the book and he's trying to keep his crew safe. So yeah, I'm really liking Shaw in this episode. So the scene is set up. It's cat and mouse submarine Wrath of Khan thing. Kind of, but not too much. And all this is even before the opening credits start. And like I say, this week they pack a lot in. So another week, another flashback, and is this something that's going to be happening weekly? I wonder. I don't know, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. I don't think we need it every week, but at the same time it's a handy device for filling in on what the Next Generation crew has been up to when they do pop up in the show. But yeah, as I said at the start of the episode, we see a slightly younger Riker and a slightly younger Picard toasting Riker's son's birth, so we know how that one ends. And let's be honest, the de-aging here works 50% of the time. Riker looks not bad, but Picard not so much. I mean, it's his forehead. It just looks so flat. And they also kind of keep Riker in the shadows a little bit and don't have his face or his eyes popping up too much looking at Picard. Which, some people are going to like this, some people aren't. I think, let's say, it didn't really work. But what did you guys think of the de-aged Riker and Picard? Let me know in the comments below. So yeah, we're seeing a point in these characters' lives that we've never seen before. We get to see Captain Riker while he was in the chair of the Titan. But you know he's not in the chair of the Titan, he's on a bar stool talking to Picard. And we get a heavy story about Riker's son's birth. So we know how this ended. But this is a father and son episode because Picard, like Riker, now has a son. And while they're having this discussion, we see Troi for the first time when she pops up on a video call, and we knew she was coming back, but what the hell is with that accent? Is that why we didn't really hear her talk in the trailer? I mean, seriously, that was like 3 different accents Marina Sirtis was doing. And although it's only just the start of the episode, Troi's appearance here starts a bad habit of forced humour. The first 2 episodes balanced the humour kind of well in that it didn't feel particularly forced, it felt kind of natural. But it does seem that kids, or at least a kid, has been on Picard's mind for a while. But anyway, back to the present, and the Titan's sitting in the dark and Captain Shaw is still doing his captain thing pretty well. But so far for me, the Titan stuff didn't have the big follow-up that last week promised us. It ended on a chase and then it started with a crawl. And is this a sign of pacing issues? Trek's had it before, you know, over a few seasons of Discovery and certainly the last season of Picard, so they might be stretching this out a little bit thin, but then again, they might just be giving us time to get to know some of the characters, because Sydney, not Geordie LaForge, but he does get a name check, decides to befriend Seven, and to give her an expo dump about what her dad's been up to. And sadly, Seven isn't really doing much this episode, they've not really pushed her forward. The same for Rafi, I hope they do, but she doesn't get too much to do this week, I'm afraid. But Beverly, on the other hand, is straight back to doctoring, and we see her and Jack really interact for the first time here. And yeah, it definitely isn't the Beverly-Wesley dynamic, let's just put it that way. Big thing we're all waiting on is a family reunion with these guys, and they kind of get it of sorts. I mean, what happens is Jack leaves as soon as Picard enters the room, a bit like he's walking off stage, so I don't get why they didn't have all 3 of them together straight away. I get we're going to need to have the Beverly explanation, and I'll get to that in a second. But again, story and pacing issues, for me, that didn't make sense. So yeah, the big explanation then, what went on, where did Jack come from, why did Beverly disappear? So 2 months before Beverly left the Enterprise, she was on holiday with Picard. When he got called back early, so this must have been around the post-Nemesis era. So I was wrong about the Season 2 thing, I put my hands up about that, but I still think it was a good theory. So yeah, that's round about the time where Jack came from, but after last week's ending, this doesn't deliver the same follow-up for me. It all feels a little bit flat. When they're talking about their relationship, she seemed to think it was over, but doesn't give any real reason of why it was ending at the time. And Picard basically said that they were on and off 4 or 5 times. So when was this 4 or 5 times? I mean, was it over 10 years or was it over like 6 months? Are they just one of these dramatic couples that get together and fall out all the time? What an absolute nightmare that must have been. But anyway, I'm a little bit confused by that, and this is where some of the logic problems start to creep in for me. She didn't tell him she was pregnant because of the danger Picard was in, because for some reason everyone in the universe wanted to kill Picard post-Nemesis, mainly because of his involvement with the Romulan thing. But she makes Picard sound like Jason Bourne, not Jean-Luc Picard. So the reason that she cut the rest of the Enterprise crew and Picard off from his son is, well, she knew that Picard had a fear of becoming his own father, so a bit of a Season 2 callback there. And going back to last week again, we had a lot of questions about how Jack came to be and why Beverly did what she did. But none of this feels like it delivered on the promise that it was set up on. Because Beverly seems to remember her time on the Enterprise as people constantly trying to kill Picard. So again, not the best writing, and this had to be a big delivery for everything that was set up, and it had to make sense, and it wasn't. They've just kind of forced this thing in what they call retconning, if that's what you want to call it. So we're getting a lot of answers, but we're also getting a lot going on here. But during the battle, Captain Shaw has to go to sick bay. He's not dead yet. Hashtag. But he's the one that wonders how Vadik keeps finding him with all this ease, especially in a nebula, which is supposed to be, you know, a pretty good place to hide. Later on board the Titan, and yeah, if you watched my theory video about Vadik, I did predict that something like this would happen, because you could see the Star Trek 6 tropes all over this. And with Shaw injured, Riker takes command, and Picard is now his number one. So, not great, not terrible, didn't like the joke, I've said that already, the humour in this episode didn't work for me, but it was a nice little scene, I've got to say. But with Riker in the chair and Picard on the side, they do butt heads on what they should do next, and I sort of guessed this would happen here, but yeah, again, it fell flat, there wasn't a lot of tension. It does come later on in the episode, but that's just more button heads, it's not really the tension that you would expect. You know, it's not Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi button heads, let's put it that way. Oh, and we also find out that the nebula is some sort of weird space anomaly thing because they have to put it into the plot because he can't escape the nebula. But they actually give it a good bash, and daylight is in sight when Vadik shows up again. How did she know where they are? And we finally see what the mystery weapon is, which is a Doctor Strange portal, which looks cool, but I don't get why she didn't move the Titan a greater distance back into the nebula. I mean, imagine there's some sort of limitations on it. Well, this is kind of cool. I did just call it the Doctor Strange portal because we've seen all this before from Marvel, and it looks great seeing Spider-Man jump through it, but seeing big ships move at slow speed isn't really that thrilling in comparison. So every time they try and escape, they're pulled deeper back in like Michael Corleone. And this is another logic point for me. They just end up heading back into the nebula instead of fighting and right out there when, you know, they're at the edge of the nebula. When they head back in later on, and, you know, spoiler alert, there's a fight at the end, that didn't make sense. They just seemed that they were pushing it back, going back, again, I'm going to say, to pacing issues. But it's not all Titan stuff this week. Of course, we've got some Rafi in here as well. And, yeah, I'm going to try and be fair on it. I mean, she's still listening to the same news show from last week. But we know that Worf's now into the mix. So what's Worf up to? Well, it seems that he's got some of Captain Picard's musical appreciation. He does give quite a long intro about son of Moog, this of that, killer of this, but he doesn't say husband of Jadzia, which I think is, again, a missed opportunity for references, and it's very rare that they don't throw a reference at it, so I was a little bit sad about that. Yeah, after he's done all this, he gives a little joke about tea and stop with the jokes, because Worf has never done humour well in Star Trek, really. And this is, what, the second or third time the bad humour's popped up in this episode. But it turns out, since she was Picard's number one, she's heard a bit about Worf, and Rafi is a Worf fanboy. But he's not exactly what she was expecting. He's now more about self-help and healing, let's put it that way. So yeah, if you're a big Worf fan, what do you think about this? Because it's quite a shocking turn for Worf. We knew it was sort of coming at in the trailers, but I thought it was mostly jokes, but it does seem that Worf is leaning more into the pacifist lifestyle. And we didn't see much of him in the trailers. He was mostly given the voiceover about the threat that was coming, and we do get a lot of that in these scenes with Rafi this week. He knows what's going on without knows what's going on. There's an attack coming, but he doesn't know where from. You get the idea. And after 2 weeks of Rafi talking to monitors, she didn't really get a lot to do once it came to a person on board the La Serena. And the whole scene is very wishy-washy, because as soon as Rafi's awake, Worf says, right, I'm going to go, I don't need your help. Rafi has literally a 30-second chat with him, and he says, oh, actually, I need you, so we need to stick together. So Worf needs her help to find the next side quest guy who knows a thing that's going to lead to another thing. And is that all she's going to do this season? I think so, probably. And they're also getting the usage out of that Metalis Prime set, because that's the third week that we've been back here. And it's also weird that everyone motivated and involved in this galactic conspiracy is all in the same neighbourhood on the one planet. And yeah, before anyone starts, I know that the guy that they torture was the Picard kid in Generations. This scene is totally Jack Bauer, because while they're torturing this guy, that's right, they're torturing him, apparently they find out it's not about the portal weapon, it's about something else that was taken, and this was all mystery box side quest that Raffi and Worf are going to have to go to. But the big twist of the episode is revealed when we find out that this so-called human is actually a shapeshifter, aka a changeling, aka the Founders, the Dominion. You know, if you've seen Deep Space Nine, you know, and if you've not, you're missing out. It doesn't matter. So the guy sort of starts to disintegrate because he's not been part of the Great Link in a while. And here's another logic problem. Why did he let himself be handcuffed if he can just turn himself into a liquid and slide out when he's going to reveal himself anyway? Now, I did say in a few videos as well, I did think there was going to be a bigger villain revealed in this season. So it turns out it's the Founders, or at least some changelings. But yeah, immediately after they find this out, I know Worf was talking to the audience, but it sounds like he's talking to Rafi about who the changelings are, and that didn't work very well for me. We also get a nod to Odo about he's the one that warned Worf about these renegade changelings. Again, doesn't make sense because earlier in the episode Worf said he didn't know what was going on. But yeah, the Rafi stuff this week is just to set up one of the reveals of the changelings that we're getting in this season. And I wish they knew how to do something more with Rafi, but they've just not delivered on it, and we're almost halfway through the season. But back on the Titan, all in the Riker chat, Jack's not done much, has he? So he's got to solve the mystery how Vadik is finding them and recruits Seven, who solves it in 2 seconds, at least works out what's going on with the ship that she's managing to trace them. So they do have a traitor on board, and Jack Crusher again becomes Jack Sparrow for a minute. And the whole ship's been sabotaged thing was right out of Star Trek 6, so I'm kind of glad that they've done this. And it is that weird transporter guy that's been popping up in the background the last few episodes. But it's more the hunt for Red October with this than Star Trek 6 in this scene, if you've seen the classic Sean Connery film, that is. And the weird ensign shows up and starts kicking Jack's ass. And we find out as well that he's a changeling, so it turns out that the Great Link were right, they are everywhere. It was also very T2 versus T800 in Terminator 2 as well. So yeah, there's changelings in Starfleet, and seems to be at least quite a few of them out there, so that's definitely how they're going to hook up Rafi, Worf and the rest of the gang. But while he's recovering from the fights, Jack's having visions now, because there's not enough going on in this episode. And they sort of fake out a death scene with his injury because they're never going to have him die this early on in the season. And Picard gets to experience the sort of loss that Riker thought he was dealing with at the start of the episode, but you know, that doesn't make sense because Riker did actually lose his son and Picard's got his. So again, logic